All right, as we've all got it now, so let's go ahead and start. It's my pleasure to introduce Mitch Walters, who is a graduate student in biology at the University of Florida. He's studying birdsong in natural and urban landscapes in Florida. This is a topic I'm sure we'll want to get him to give another presentation on later. He's also published papers on northern mockingbirds. He's currently doing really exciting cutting edge work using machine learning to analyze bird songs in whole communities. It's really fun stuff. He's also a popular teacher, a very sought after TA. He's a bird watcher as well, traveled all over the world. But above all, Mitch is a very dedicated, very talented photographer. He's won many different awards. He's very passionate about it. He really, I've seen him, in fact, spend hours motionless waiting for a bird to move into the exact spot. He has endless patience for this, the kind of thing I could never even dream of doing. He's published photos in National Geographic, Audubon, BBC Wildlife Photographers magazine. He's also won Bird Photographer of the Year by Outdoor Photographer magazine. He's had his photographs on the cover of scientific journals. He also got a fellowship to attend the North American Nature Photography Association convention in 2015. He's a native Californian who got his bachelor's degree at Cornell, where they do a little bit of bird work now and then. He came to UF to work with me and also with Rob Gorolnik. So, Mitch, go ahead and take it away.
Right. Let's go ahead and do this. All right. Thank you very much. Get this guy going. All right. Hope everybody can see that. Well, Scott, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and the folks at Marion County, thank you so much for hosting this. And thank you all for attending. This is a huge honor. It's a real delight to take a break from scientific talks and move into another major passion of mine, which is bird photography. There's my email address if you have any questions about photography or prints, that kind of stuff. And then there's my Instagram account there where you can see all the stuff I've done. And today is really just about, kind of a quick sort of crash course in the introduction to kind of bird photography. We're going to be kind of covering, kind of my general approach and my techniques to this wonderful art that I've been dedicating to the last 10, 12 years to doing. So for those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you, since this is in Marion County and I am based in Alachua County. My name is Mitch. I've been photographing birds all over the world for the last 10, 12 years. And it all started when my dad, there he is, gave me his Canon camera and 100, 400 millimeter lens. I've actually brought them here. This is where it all happens. It's been updated since he gave it to me when I was a junior in college. I have updated the camera and lens, but it's still the same setup. And since I acquired that from him, I have basically taken my camera with me everywhere I go. And I mean literally everywhere. We have Costa Rica, Hawaii, Southern California, where I'm from. There's Costa Rica again, and I've met a lot of friends along the way. There you go. I would say it's getting a little out of control, my obsession with this. Yes, so even if the Roadrunner says that you're going too fast, then you know that you have a problem. But I think that we all have the same problem, and it's a good problem to have. To me, bird photography is so much more than just a hobby. It is a means to communicate and showcase the beauty and diversity of birds for the rest of our lives, right? It's a permanent type of it's a way that we can share forever, and we can also showcase the various threats that are going on with avifauna with bird photography. So it's a very powerful tool, and for me, it's also just my greatest means of escape. It's where I'm at peace from everything. Because even if the human world continues to disappoint us in many ways, the bird world never will, right? It's always there. It's always there at our fingertips. This chestnut-sided warbler is never going to decide one day, you know what? I'm not going to really sing today. It looks like it's going to rain. Yeah, I don't think so. And I'm probably not going to feed my kids either. There's plenty of insects around. No, they don't do that. They're out there ready to give it 110%. And I think that that's it's a really nice luxury that we have. We can really go anywhere and we can photograph birds. And one of my favorite things about birds is the diversity of birds, right? There's a diversity in the way they look, how they sound, the habitat they live in, so many different things. And you'll find that a lot of bird photographers, swear by getting as close as possible to the bird and just like getting that type of shot. And as much as I love shots like that, and I strive to get shots like that because that can really show us the beauty of the bird itself, I also believe in getting diversity of bird shots. I think it's sometimes good to take a step back and look at a bird in its environment, right? You don't need to have the biggest lens all the time. You can get powerful shots from further away, okay? But you can also go the reverse route. You can go super close and you can observe the fine details of the bird, from its feathers, its eye, right? This is a sandhill crane, by the way. You'll be seeing a lot of sandhill crane photos. Very, very photo-friendly birds. And then we can also say, heck with plumage, why don't we just focus on the shape of the bird, right? We can get silhouette shots and really just look at iconic shapes of birds out there. And then, of course, my favorite thing to type of photograph, right, is the behavior, whether that's action shots, capturing birds, doing the things that they do, that's doing the stuff that we love, right? That's the kind of stuff I think that can really make a photograph of a bird a little bit more compelling than it just on a perch or on the side of a trunk. I strive to I kind of combine my interest in bird watching and science, and I bring that into the photography so we can kind of show birds a little bit more than just aesthetic things on branches. So one of the things that I would like to do, if everybody can kind of take a look at their in the chat, if you could just answer yes or no. I'm just curious to know, the people among us, how many have you done any bird photography? Yes or no? If you can just write that into the chat. I just want to see where we're at. We've got lots of yeses. Just if there's any no's, okay, Kathy, so nice to hear you come in here and take your first step into the bird world. Emily as well. Wonderful. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we've got a few. We've got mostly yeses, but I'm happy to hear that there are some no's as well. So hopefully this is a good. Oh, someone took a nice drawing across my picture. I didn't know you could do that. Anyway, okay. So for those of you who have, I love to see that there are some no's as well. For those of you who have, can you just put down roughly how many years you've been photographing birds, more or less? Again, this is just, I want to kind of see where people are at. Okay, so Michelle put down 5, good. 1 year, good. Hopefully it's been a good year, Brent. All right, Pauline, more than 10 years. All right, you can teach me a little something as well. I'm not sure who keeps drawing on the picture. I'm getting these scribbles. I don't know if anybody else can see that, but I really didn't know you could do that. Not many, 2, 3. Okay, I love it. Early Pleistocene. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so that's wonderful. So I'm all about diversity of photography, and it looks like we have a diversity of photographers out there as well in terms of experience. Wonderful. Okay. How do we, because everyone, I'm sorry, can people see that drawing there? Do you know how you get that off the, is anyone else seeing that? Or is that
I can see it. This is Joan. I can see it.
I didn't do anything.
It's
No
kind of
idea.
weird how I didn't know. I had no idea you could do that.
No, I didn't know that either. Is there any way I can get rid of
Bob, the name Bob came up when the first one came on there.
Yeah. Let me see. I don't know. This is like I've done so many Zoom talks. I've never seen that before, but
that is me. I am so sorry. I do not know what I did. I think I bumped something. Hello, Mitch. Sorry about that. I'm on my phone.
and one of my best friends, Bob, here. Excellent. He's coming in.
I clicked the pen icon and I have no way to, I tried leaving and thinking that it might go away, but it doesn't.
Okay. No, don't worry about it. This is hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
There's no race. This might make it go away.
Okay.
Nope. Sorry about that. I will let you continue.
Okay. But I will keep I'll just kind of Let me see. There is an eraser option for me, but I can't seem to have. I can't really seem to do that. So yeah. So we can try to figure out how to do that. That'd be excellent. Okay. So if we can go ahead and we'll kind of. So this is sort of where we're kind of at in terms of the topics of discussion today. So basically today we're going to be talking about three main things. So we want to first start off with how do we understand the camera, right? The basic concepts of the camera. Any artist, if they want to learn anything, they have to learn their craft first, all right? And so we're going to kind of get into that category, and then if we can, then we kind of segue into what do we do when we're actually out there? When they're actually out there in the wild, that's the fun stuff. Like how do we approach birds? How do we get close to them? How do we deal with that? Okay, and then I have some additional tips that we can kind of work on. So let's first start with the camera. And again, if we can figure out a way to get rid of, I'm sorry, the lines are just a little distracting for me, it being a photography talk and all. But if we can kind of figure that out somehow, that would be most excellent. Or if someone can kind of look up how you might do that. But anywho, so with the wildlife camera, right? This is what all wildlife cameras kind of look like. I shoot with Canon, all right? And so even though if you're a Nikon user, it's a lot of the same, it's the same general concept. The terminology might be a little bit different, right? We've got our, I'm trying to see if I can there we go. So we got our shutter button here, right? This can, this will allow us to, take the photograph, but also if we touch it part way, that's how we can focus on an image and do a lot of other things, okay? So the very first thing you may notice when you do this, when you take your photographs, you have two different types of images that you can produce. You can have JPEGs, or you can have raw files, all right? So we all are pretty familiar with JPEGs, okay? They compress the image to make the file smaller. The raw images, on the other hand, contain all the uncompressed and unprocessed image data. So there's two major differences among those. Okay, so if we look at the pros of the JPEG, right, we can take a lot more photos and we can get a lot less storage space from that. But the big cons are that the image quality is a lot lower and harder to manipulate in post-production. That's a really big con, which is why I tend to use raw files. Okay, they are higher quality, and you can manipulate them in post-production, whether that's in Photoshop or Lightroom, and that's a really important part of bird photography. I could have a whole talk about that kind of thing. Okay, and the con is that them being bigger files, they can fill up your memory card and increase storage space. Okay, and so sometimes if you're actually rapid firing with the camera, you can actually have the camera can create a busy label. It can freeze and kind of buffer because the files are too big and you've taken too many photographs. So that is one of the only issues with RAW, but it's a small price to pay. I generally go with RAW photos. So then if we go into the autofocus, if we go into the focusing realm, okay, there's two different types of ways that you can focus an image. One is the autofocus, the other is manual focus, and I use autofocus. You can find these on the actual lens of the camera. Autofocus I use pretty much 98% of the time, okay? Whereas manual focus is something that I use very occasionally and basically in two types of scenarios, okay? For one, if there's too many plants in the way of the bird, then you can, it can be really hard for the autofocus to pick up on the bird. So that's where the manual focus can come into play. And also, if that's the case, the bird also has to not be moving. Okay, that's a big other factor, because if the bird's moving, it's really hard to focus, to actually manually crank the manual focus as the bird's moving. So you really want to make sure the bird is still and there's a lot of vegetation. That's when you often can use manual focus if the autofocus can't pick up on the bird, okay? And so this is a shot that I took since I am from California, this is a shot of a wren tit that I took where that was the situation. There was too much vegetation in the way. The autofocus couldn't pick up the bird, and the bird wasn't moving. It was just sitting there and singing. And so I had to use manual focus to get that shot. So if you go on the back of the camera, right, there's pretty much all of these cameras have little viewfinders for you. And you basically have this menu. If you click the menu button, you get all these different things that you can look at, okay? And this is the kind of stuff that is important to kind of understand, sort of the general idea around the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. So one thing you may notice on the back here, okay, is this thing called AI Servo, and it's one of 3 different types of techniques that you can use. Yeah, so basically, you can have 3 different types of parts here. You can have what we call one-shot, AI focus, and AI servo. I'm sorry. So one shot you use for still subjects, okay? And so if the subject is not moving, what will happen, you can put it on one shot mode and the camera will beep when the bird is in focus, okay? And so I use this when I know that the bird's not moving anywhere, if it's an osprey kind of sitting in place, something like that. And then on the other hand, you have AI servo mode, which I use for objects in motion, okay? So the camera will not beep when it's in focus, but what happens is you press the shutter part way, and all you have to do is just move, and the camera will continue to focus on the bird, okay? Which is really important when you have birds in flight or really small birds that like to move around a lot, right? Like little warblers or kinglets or things like that. And so I often use that in that case. And then there's also AI focus, which is sort of in between, where the camera decides which of these two is actually necessary. So it's actually called autofocus for Nikon. And so for one shot and AI focus, the camera will beep when it's in focus, but it will not continue to, if you press and hold the shutter and continue to move the camera, it will not continue to focus. You'll have to continue to press and beep, which will continue to focus on the bird, okay? And so I tend to use all 3 of these. I tend to use AI servo a lot because birds are constantly moving. But usually when I start out, I kind of stay at AI focus. And if I find a bird that's sitting still, I'll switch to one shot, deal with that, or I will then switch to AI servo if it's a bird in flight, or if I'm trying to follow something that's very mobile. Another thing that you will see on the back of the camera is this little icon here, okay? And so that is telling you how many focusing points you want on the subject, okay? So generally speaking, when we focus, okay, we like to focus the camera on the bird's eye. Once the bird's eye is in focus, the rest of the bird kind of follows suit on that. And so that's kind of where we sort of begin. But there are other ways that you can actually focus on the bird. So the first, you can see here when you look on the back in the menu, there are a variety of different focusing points, okay? And then basically what happens is we move from left to right, the size of the imaging window, right, increases, which means that more focusing points are now going to be available to you, which is going to increase the chance of you to be able to focus on your bird. So for me, most of the time, I'm using the first 2, okay? I like to be able to have control of where I focus my point, okay? And so these are the ones that I'm using most of the time, okay? So for still subject or for large birds in flight that are easy to where it's easy to focus on the eye because the bird is so large, okay? And then I tend to use more focusing points when you have smaller birds in flight and bird flocks. Okay, so this is a situation like if you're trying to, I can tell you right now, if you're trying to focus on a swallow as it's moving around in its haphazard ways, right? It's very hard to focus on the bird with just one focusing point. So when you have these multi-point focusing options, it just increases the chance that you're going to be able to lock onto that bird. But there's one caveat to that, and that is that if the bird, you want to make sure that the background isn't changing much, okay? Because the minute the bird moves into an area with lots of vegetation as it's flying, then these focusing points are going to focus on the nearest object, and then you'll lose your bird, and it will get out of focus. So so that's just one thing to kind of consider. Okay, so but for the most part, they can be really helpful with that. Okay. Okay, so then how do we get proper exposure? Okay, so proper exposure is really, really key. There's a lot of different elements you can kind of get into this, okay? But there's three main pillars when it comes to exposure. You have aperture, you have shutter speed, and you have ISO. So the aperture, right, you can kind of think of as as your pupil, right? So the wider the aperture, the more light is going to be brought into the camera, but you're going to have the smallest and the shallowest depth of field. So we tend, as bird photographers, we tend to shoot on the lower aperture level, as in the lower f-stop, but wider aperture, lower f-stop level, right around in the 5.6, 5.8 area. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to blur our background as much as we can, okay? Because that is going to accentuate the bird. However, if you want to try to get a shot of the bird in its habitat, and you want to get the mountains and the trees and all this other stuff in the background, okay, then shooting with a smaller aperture will do the job. So I went out into the field. I went out to Sweetwater Wetlands Park, which for those of you from Alachua County know that is an amazing spot for photography. And now before everyone gets up in arms, all right, I know this isn't a bird. Everyone's like, what? I thought this was a bird photography class. I was like, all right, I tried to find birds to do this type of exercise with, but it just wasn't working out, and I found this rabbit. And it was a few days after Easter, so come on, it seems appropriate. But this is a situation where I'm shooting at f5.6, so we're at the very low end of the scale. So wide aperture, you can see the background is very, very blurred. But if I move this to something like f18, now we can see that a little blob in the background there happens to actually be another rabbit, and you can see that we can start to see the vines and the different separations of the grass. Right, we start to pick up on the details in the background. Okay, so that is an example of something where you can kind of see the differences there. And so other times that I will increase the f-stop, right, and increase my depth of field is if I want to get multiple birds in focus. Okay. So I took a picture of these three goofballs in South Florida, and I just thought the expression on these guys was so phenomenal. And if I had shot at f5.6, then only our individual in the middle would be in focus, and our two on the side would be out of focus. So I shot this at f10 instead of f5.6 or something, so I could get all three birds in focus. Okay, if you want to take pictures of flocks, okay, that's another situation where I would increase the f-stop so that all of the individuals in the flock are in focus. You can even tell that some of these guys right here and here, some of the closer birds, were slightly out of focus. You could argue that I take this shot at like f12 and maybe I get more things in focus, but that is a situation where I would also increase my f-stop, and I would also do it if I'm taking pictures of large birds in flight. Okay, so something like swallow-tailed kites, bald eagles. If I want to get the tips of those primaries and the tips of those tail feathers in focus, right? Because they're big birds. All right, f9, f11 for these guys, for instance. Because if you shoot at f5.6, yes, the eye will be in focus and the legs, but then the very tips of the feathers will be out of focus. So that's another thing to kind of consider. Okay, so aperture, and then we have shutter speed. So shutter speed is going to be our main tool to freeze motion. As bird photographers, we like to have higher shutter speed so that we can freeze motion, because birds are constantly moving and flapping their wings. And so we want to try to maximize our effort to have kind of higher shutter speeds, okay? And so as a rule of thumb, you want the shutter speed to be roughly the inverse of your focal length, okay? So if I shoot at 400 millimeters, you want the shutter to be roughly 1/400th of a second if you want to, at least at the minimum, to freeze motion. That being said, if you don't have the opportunity to do that, right, you're in a darker environment, you can still get good shots in focus. You just have to there's another element to it that I haven't talked about, and I will in a second. And you have to also hope that your bird is staying still, because the minute it twitches and stuff in a low light environment, if you're shooting at 1/50th of a second, it's going to be blurred. Okay, so sometimes you can get lucky though. One thing you may be wondering, right, is how do I decide what shutter speed to do and what aperture combo to do? It seems kind of complicated. And the good news is that you can make things a little easier for yourself. So I always set my camera to something called AV mode, which is aperture priority. So what that means is that I choose the aperture and then the camera chooses the shutter speed for me. Okay, makes life way easier. Okay, I have a better understanding of how about how the shutter, I want to have a little more control of my depth of field, right? What I'm trying to look for, and so I'll let the camera kind of pick the shutter for me, which is really, really nice. Okay, so if you still shoot, in this case, I'm shooting at f5.6, which is my widest aperture. I'm bringing in the most light possible. The camera is still only giving me 1/100th of a second, so it's a pretty dark area. So how can you help yourself even further so that you make that 1/100th to 1/400 or something like that? Okay, that's where ISO comes into play. It's another dial on the camera, okay, that you can adjust. Okay, as you increase your ISO, things become brighter. But there's a catch, and the catch is that your photos will become grainier, or they will have more, quote, noise. Okay, we don't like noise. The good news is that if you're in the market for a new camera, the wildlife cameras these days have a tremendous ability to reduce noise even at high ISO. I was starting off with a Canon 5D. I basically anything beyond ISO 800 it just looked terrible. I couldn't, the noise was just too much. Now I'm shooting at f 1600, 2000, sometimes even 3200, and I can still get nice images. So as camera technology continues to increase, our ability to take good photos in low light scenarios is becoming better and better. The use of flash and stuff is becoming slightly less of a necessity these days, which is quite cool. And so the combination of high ISO, right, and wide aperture, that's going to really bring in as much light as we can, and that's going to maximize the chances of us freezing that bird in motion. No, okay, so now, if let's say you're in this scenario and it's still not exposed quite the way you want, right? The bird it's frozen, or maybe it's still underexposed or some way, then you can fiddle with this dial here. So if you press your shutter button part way, then you can move the dial. You can see the dial on the right side here. You can just see a bit of it. If you move the dial counterclockwise or clockwise, you can increase the exposure this direction. And if you go counterclockwise, you will then decrease the exposure. Okay, so when would you want to potentially do that, right? You can just simply take a photo. If you don't like the way it looks, if it's underexposed, overexposed, you can adjust it that way. But one thing I will make note of, something that will happen, where you are going to have to probably do this almost every time, when the background is a lot brighter than the subject. So for instance, if you're photographing a bird with sky behind it, right? If you shoot it with the middle, all right, the bird's going to be really dark. Okay, so I often will have to increase my exposure a notch or so, so that I can actually see a bit of that bird in that white background. Okay, yes, the background will get more overexposed, but if it's a sky, right, and there's no clouds or anything else we're trying to capture, right, it doesn't really matter, right? So that's one way you can kind of make use of that situation. On the reverse side, okay, if a subject is a lot brighter than the background, right? So let's say a titmouse flies its way to the forest floor, and it's very dark green, and the bird's kind of a brightish gray. Okay, that bird is often going to get overexposed, right? The camera often does that. So whenever I'm out in the forest, right, in a darker area, I tend to lower my my shutter a little bit in the beginning just to kind of compensate, because the reality is you can make up for a dark photo in post-production. It's much easier to expose that correctly than if it's an overexposed image. Oftentimes, if images are overexposed, there's just no way to correct that, and it's stuck like that. So for better or for worse, underexpose the image a little bit. That's an easier fix in post-production. Okay. There's also another tool called spot metering, which is something that I haven't really dove into, haven't really done much work in, but it's another way to kind of correct for that. But I've gotten used to kind of using the dial as is. One other last bit on the exposure level is this icon here that you might see. All right, and this is one of many white balance settings. So white balance is a way for us to adjust the temperature or warmth of the image. So the higher the temperature, the more oranges, yellows, sepia tones that we get in the image, and then the lower end means that we kind of lose that warmth. Okay. And so you can set it to the auto one where it just kind of does it for you. And so when you're beginning in your photography kind of days, like you can use auto on a lot of these things just to let the camera decide for you. But as you start to do this more and more, you start to realize that you may have a preference for stuff. You want to fine tune things. So for me, I often have my camera set on the cloudy white balance setting. I just kind of like the way it looks. Except for if it's super, super sunny out, then I will probably move to the daylight or auto one so I can take a little bit of that warmth out. But I kind of like having a little bit of warmth and color in the photos. So I pretty much am sticking to cloudy at the beginning. And if it's really, really bright out, I will switch to daylight or auto. Pretty much never use shade unless it's like, really, really dark. And then the tungsten and below ones, I don't really use those. So that pretty much, oh, and here's, I wish this was me who did this, but there's a video that I found of someone showing the differences between these things. Okay, and so you can see that the shade white balance is kind of the most yellow, the most has the most kind of warmth and color to it. All right, cloudy slightly less so, daylight slightly less so, and then the auto white balance in this mode in this situation, it created the least warm image. So you can kind of decide for yourself what you kind of like. I think the daylight actually in this situation looks pretty good. The cloudy looks fine. I think shade's a little too much, and I think the auto white balance is just, there seems to be a little bit too much loss in my opinion. So this is just a preference that you can play around with. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So that pretty much covers the understanding of the camera. Now let's get to the fun stuff. So what do you do when you're actually out there? So the number one thing to do, how do we get close? How do we position ourselves? And how do we position the bird when it's in the frame? Okay, so the first thing, right, if we want to try to get close to the bird, how do we do this? Well, one thing that you can definitely do in the field, right, is approach a bird slowly. I tend to take baby steps towards the bird. Walk a little bit closer, photograph, walk a little bit, photograph. So in case the bird flies away, I don't lose anything. I always photograph and then move. And I'm always looking for signs of distress from the bird. Okay, so if the bird all of a sudden perks its head up and is looking at you, right, that's a time to stop. Okay, if the bird starts to walk away from you or swim, if it's a duck or something, right, that's another statement saying, hey, you're getting a little close. If you try to move any closer, the bird's going to probably fly away. We don't want to really stress the bird out. Okay, moving at different angles can help. If you go straight towards the bird, right, in an aggressive manner, that's going to probably freak them out more. So there are ways that you can approach more slowly and watch to see if the bird's cool. If it continues to preen and not really care, like then you can move in closer until you're basically satisfied with where you are. Another really important way you can get close is to anticipate where the bird is going. Okay, that's a way that you can really you'd be one step ahead of the bird, and then you can get yourself when the bird occurs. So one classic example of me anticipating where the bird is going is when I got this photograph here of one of our biggest celebrities here in Gainesville. Is this beautiful yellow cardinal, right? This was a bird that's been sweeping not just the state and the county, but sweeping the nation. And This is a bird that was hanging, everyone was photographing out at the boardwalk trail at the Natural Areas Teaching Lab at the University of Florida. And when I came to visit the first time, I just wanted to kind of see how the bird was behaving, and I got some just some documentation shots, but I also just took my camera down and just watched the bird. I watched it move around and got to sort of figure out where it likes to hang out. And I noticed that there was one spot that the bird liked to forage in more than others that allowed me to get a lot closer. And so my second visit, I just skipped. I saw that there were people at the boardwalk, which meant that I knew the bird was there. And I just went straight to my spot, even though the bird wasn't there. And I just sat and I waited. I probably waited about 20, 25 minutes. And lo and behold, the little yellow guy showed up. And I was able to, it may not be the greatest shot in the world, but I was very satisfied with it. And I noticed the bird was starting to then be weary of me, even though I wasn't moving. And it's because I didn't notice, but a crowd of about 15, 20 people had gathered behind me and started photographing the bird because they hadn't seen it over there. And so, so that wasn't because it's just because I was watching and I could tell where the bird was going to potentially go, and I lucked out in that sense. Hummingbirds are another really good example of a bird you can anticipate a lot. So flycatchers, same kind of way. Birds that males that like to come back to certain perches all the time, right? All you have to do, watch, see where they like to go, and then just plant yourself. That's what I did with this Anna's hummingbird. I saw that it liked this perch. The other perches, it was too much vegetation around it. It was too hard to get in there. And this perch was nice and exposed. I literally sat 4 feet from the perch, and the little green and red gem plopped right in front of me, just started preening, didn't care. And it was one of the most amazing experiences I've had. So this is a common thing that's happened to me with hummingbirds, okay? This can also happen a lot if you know where nests are or you know where birds like to roost, okay? But we'll talk at the very end about ethics with nests. You want to really make sure you're not stressing the bird out with that, but always look for signs of stress. So then how do you actually position yourself? Okay, so let's say you finally approach the bird, you're right there. How do you position yourself? Okay, one of the main things you want to do is you want to try to get the sun behind you. This isn't set in stone. Okay, this isn't, you have to swear by this because we see that there's lovely shots with silhouettes and unique lighting situations. But if you really are trying to just highlight the bird as best you can, right? You want to keep the sun behind you, and it's best to go photographing in the early morning, early evening, sunset, sunrise, because the sun is at its lowest, the colors pop the most, right? That's the best light, okay? And so that is kind of a staple. So here's an example of a Bachman sparrow that I photographed, okay? It's a very difficult species to photograph. It's small, it's brown, it moves around the ground, barely makes any noise until it pops up. And there's always vegetation around it. And so this was a situation where I finally got the bird, but the lighting was off because the lighting was coming from my right side. It wasn't behind me. So you can see that it's cast some shadows on the bird. It's created some of these bright spots, okay? So what I had to do is I had to spend another 45 minutes walking around, following, not stressing the bird out. And eventually I was able to get the sun behind me, and I got the bird singing with the sun behind me. And yes, there's still a little bit of vegetation in the way. It's so hard to mitigate that unless you can find a place where you know a bird goes where it's branch free or vegetation free. But when you're just out there winging it, no pun intended, you just take what you got. And I was very satisfied with this. Probably my favorite photograph I've taken of Bachman sparrow for quite some time. Another thing that you can do to position yourself is try to get eye level with the birds, okay? Because this is going to go hand in hand with making the ideal background, okay? So here's an example of me photographing this great blue heron, and I'm staring down at the bird, okay? Bird's in focus, properly exposed, but this vegetation here is a little bit noisy. It's distracting us a little bit, right? There's a bit of coloration mixture in the background here from the water, okay? All I had to do was crouch just a little bit, and I was able to get a much cleaner image, all right? Maybe in an ideal world, I could get rid of this vegetation entirely, but it produces a much cleaner image. This is me going out on Saturday to try to take these shots for you guys. Okay, so I did the best that I could with this. Okay, and so yes, you always want to watch your background. Okay, so here's another photographic series that I have. Okay, so here's an osprey that I took. Nicely exposed, I think, best I could do in focus. background's a little bit noisy. It's distracting from the bird a bit because we have these pockets of sun or of sky coming in through the vegetation. So I've seen these talks on YouTube where they're like, oh, you can like go in post-production and change the background. Like, no, don't do that. Keep it natural, right? All I had to do was move, move, and I was able to get the vegetation completely out of the way. So I had this nice white image. That's an option. Then I also moved the other way, and I got an image where it was completely dark, right? Maybe it wasn't perfectly dark, but it was a much darker background. It really makes the bird pop. So these are little things that you can do. If you go to a bird, we always get so excited to photograph our bird, but just take a look at the surroundings a little bit and see if you can try to angle things the best you. I obviously couldn't get eye level with this bird. It was way up above me, but I was still able to get a decent shot by moving around a little bit. Another bit of celebrities here in Alachua County is our local resident Sandhill Crane family. The chicks are adorable. They're at Sweetwater. You can walk right up to them and photograph them. I took this photograph, properly exposed, in focus. Okay, background is a little bit messy. It's a little bit distracting. There's lots of grass and in the foreground and the background. It's a little bit distracting, right? I had to increase my depth of field a little bit so that I could get both chicks in focus, but wasn't quite satisfied with what I was getting. All I had to do was move in front of the birds, okay, and lower myself a little bit to get to their level, and I was able to produce a shot like this, okay? And I think it really captures the birds a bit more. It accentuates the birds more, okay? It's not, the background is not nearly as distracting, and I was able to be quite satisfied with what I got there, right? And this was all, just I looked at the beauty of these cameras. You can look at what you're seeing and being like, oh, I don't like this, and you can make adjustments. This is something that you can adjust. So another thing to do is, okay, what about positioning the bird itself? Where do I put the bird in the frame? A lot of this can be done in post-production, okay? So here's a situation of a piping plover that I took, properly exposed, in focus, all right? But putting the bird in the center of the frame isn't the ideal situation, right? So some of you have probably heard of the rule of thirds. So if we divide the image up into basically these three rows, what we want to really try to do is we want to try to put the contours of the bird right along these lines and put our main objects of focus, the eye, the head, kind of somewhat closer to these intersection points. Okay, so a lot of this can be done in post-production. You can also, in the one-shot option, remember when I was talking about one-shot you can press and it will focus, and then you can move the camera and it'll still lock on the first thing you focused on. So you can actually make these adjustments in real time. You can also just do this in post-production. So if I move the bird, right, and crop it a little bit, so now that we have the bird lying on the contours of the bird lying on these lines, and the head and eye is now a little bit closer to that intersection point, we create a little bit of a nicer image. Okay, and so that's a quick and dirty way that we can actually kind of do that. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow these rules. That's the beauty of art, right? You don't need to follow rules, but as a whole, this rule of thirds does tend to make pleasing images. We can also use lines to help guide us to our bird, right? So here's a shot of a great horned owl that I took, all right? It does sort of follow the rule of thirds, right? It's still kind of falling along this line, these lines here, but the branch of this tree is guiding us here. The branch of the tree is guiding us to the bird. It makes it very pleasing to look at the bird this way, right? Or of the same Anna's hummingbird I took before, right? A little bit further out, it does kind of lie nicely on those lines, and then this nice branch here comes in and guides us to the bird nice and easily, right? So these are things that you kind of look up. Now, this is not always going to be the case. You don't have to do this, right? Symmetry is another really important key, right? So here's a situation where, okay, the eyes of the tricolored heron are somewhat along that rule of thirds, but then the rest of it doesn't really follow suit. But the fact that the reflection is on the bottom half and the bird's on the top half, I think creates a really nice balanced image that's not really very rule of thirdsy. Okay, and then one of my favorite photographs I've ever taken is of these two barn owls back in California. Okay, again, the rule of thirds has been somewhat broken, but the symmetry, I think, makes it nice. The only thing that is kind of rule of thirdsy is this sort of horizon bit here on the top of the rock here is sort of going across that. It wouldn't look as good if it was going straight across the middle. So the rule of thirds is something I kind of am always sort of looking at a little bit. And as another point, you always want to kind of give some space in the direction the bird's looking at. I think that's always kind of a nice kind of element. If the bird's looking straight at you, all right, then the bird can kind of be the center point of the photo. Or if you want to show a little bit of the belly or something, the eyes can be facing you at the top half, and then you can have the bird going the bottom half. So there's just different ways you can play around with it, but really just what looks good to you, right, at the end of the day. Okay, and then the last kind of snippet here is some additional tips, okay? And so one thing that I think is very, very key is you can often pre-focus on something before the bird shows up, okay? So really the name of the game with bird photography is lightning fast. We want things to be as fast as possible so that because the bird's not going to hang around for very long. So if we can maximize our chances of getting on that bird and getting our shot, that's great. So if you can tell a bird is coming in your direction, it's moving in the tree and it's about to go into an area, go ahead and just lightly, like do a half press on the shutter to focus on a branch or something in the same depth of field as the bird. Because then when that bird gets into frame, the camera's already there. Because if you've focused on something way far away previously, and now you're trying to get the camera to focus on something totally different, it's going to have a hard time finding it quickly, especially if there's lots of vegetation for it to focus on. So if you've already got a branch right there in focus, then it's just that much easier. I can't tell you how many times that saved my butt. You can also take shots, like for instance, if you're waiting at a nest for like an osprey or something, and the bird's not there, hasn't brought fish back or something, or nest material, just take a picture of the nest to make sure everything's exposed right? Because then if the bird shows up and you take all these rapid fire shots and you just look, oh my God, like I forgot to change the ISO, right? And now they're all overexposed and I've lost that, right? Take a breath, take a little practice shot, make sure everything's in line, and then you'll be more prepared. Another fun thing are customized settings, okay? So I can't tell you how many times I'm photographing something, right? And I have all these settings ready for this scenario, then all of a sudden something else happens, right? So I'm photographing a limpkin, low in the water, it's dark, and then all of a sudden an osprey comes right over me with like the massive fish, and I'm like scrambling to try to change my settings. Not even Wyatt Earp is fast enough to change his settings and fire away, right? Like you can't do that. So customized settings is the way to go, okay? So if you go on the dial of your camera, right? On the dial of the camera, so you can see there's AV mode, right? So I was talking about AV. TV is shutter priority. P is program mode, which means the camera does everything for you. And then there's manual mode, and B is bulb, which I never use. But these customized settings are the ones where I have customized settings for various scenarios. So my C1, I've made settings for birds in flight with a sky background. Okay, I have already set those up on C1 before I've gone out. So in case that happens, all of a sudden a bird from the sky is coming over me, all I have to do is just switch to C1 and I'm ready, right? Or at least I'm in much better position than I was before. And that's how I was able to get this shot of this osprey. The exact thing I just described, that's what happened. It came right on over me, and I was able to get that shot because of those customized settings, okay? So that can be a real game changer in certain scenarios. A fun thing here is, okay, well now how do I find these birds, right? How do I find birds like this, right? And I call these birds photo pro birds, birds that are just camera friendly, right? So certainly as bird watchers, as many of you are, you probably are familiar with some individuals that can be fairly photo friendly, right? So looking for tame individuals like the sandhill crane family, great place to practice, right? If you're an Alachua County person, Sweetwater right now is they're draining one of the ponds to regrow the vegetation. So the water level is super low, and there's an absurd amount of herons gathered there. And the ospreys are coming in and diving over and over again. The same thing kind of happened at the Alachua Trail a couple of years ago when we had bald eagles coming in and stuff. And that allows for repetition. They're going to keep coming to that spot over and over again, which gives you many opportunities to get the shot that you want, right? So go and use your bird watching skills to go out there and find birds that can be friendly. And then you can go back and maybe take a stab at them if you know they're going to return to that spot. And this also can happen outside of your local area, okay? With my PhD, I've become very, very accustomed to how eBird works. And eBird can be helpful for photography as well as bird watching. For instance, it was my goal this last winter to get piping plover photos. I just never got a photo of piping plover, and they're so adorable, and I wanted to get a photograph of them. So I went to eBird to find out. What I was looking for are three things. One, the number of checklists, the number of sightings, right? That guarantees the bird's there. You know that. I'm also looking at the numbers. Look at this Fort Matanzas Peninsula. I noticed compared to all the other sites that people were seeing. Look how many individuals. Emily had a field day. She got 10 of them. And the third thing I'm looking at is look at those photo icons. That indicates that these birds are photograph worthy. Okay. There's other places I go to where it's like one individual, two individuals, no photographs. And I don't want to drive all the way over there and be disappointed. It happens all the time, right? You end up getting photographs of something, but doing this kind of breakdown, I've been doing it for the last few years and it's really worked out. And so at the end of the day, I also clicked on the Fort Matanzas Peninsula hotspot and was doing the same thing with other shorebirds. And it looked like there was tons of shorebirds. And at the end of the day, I was able to get a lot of great images before the tide came in, right? Including sanderling, semi-palmated plover, skimmer, and of course our piping plover. Worked out great. Okay, doesn't always do that, right? Patience is a big part of this, but you can maximize your happiness. And then the last thing to do is to watch for behavior and look at your surroundings. Okay, so here's an image. It pretty much covers all the stuff I've talked about, right? Nice western bluebird in Southern California, clean background, really accentuates the bird, but it is just a bird on the perch. I sat with the bird for a bit, it yawned and it called and did this, and I think that it ups the image a bit, gives it a little more flair, gives me a little bit more dynamic, okay? So always look for that kind of stuff, okay? Don't just take a few photos and leave, see what the bird's doing, okay? Here's a picture of a very common species here in Florida, right? The yellow-rumped warbler. Here's a picture of it taking off, right? Gives it a little bit more, and since this is sort of a flycatchery warbler, right? It's a little bit easier to capture them in flight because they tend to kind of make these short little flutters. Phoebes are really good as well for that kind of thing. Okay, so gives you a little bit more. And then in terms of watching your surroundings, okay, so here's a scenario where I was photographing this sedge wren at dawn. Nice photograph, a little shaded, but I took a step back. It's always good to just take a step back and look at the surroundings. And I felt that the surrounding environment with the bird was a little more powerful, a little more of a compelling image. So remember, big lenses up close, although those are great, they're not, it's not the end all be all. You can get great images with a shorter lens. Always look at your surroundings. And the last thing, since we're about to hit 50 minutes here, the very last thing I'm going to say is ethics. Always look out for ethics. Bird photographers are notorious for breaking these rules, and it's very, very frustrating to do that because not only are you going to annoy all the other photographers, but you're also, more importantly, stressing out the bird. So if you're in a group, try to minimize crowding around the bird, right? Freaking it out. Okay, if the bird is swimming away from you or walking away from you, like, okay, give it a try, and if it continues to just avoid, don't chase it, because that's how you, I can't tell you how many times I've heard about rare birds showing up in places and then 2 days later it's gone because some photographer was relentless with it and it got away. Okay. Another thing that's a bit debatable is using playback. Okay, I've started to minimize the use of playback when I do photography, because remember, when you do playback, you're telling that bird there's another male, or if you're doing a female chip, you're getting that bird all riled up for a photo. And you can make the argument that in the grand scale of freakouts for the bird, this is just one of many, but if we all take that same approach, then everybody's doing it, and then it's going to be kind of a problem. And as a matter of fact, a lot of contests, including Audubon Photography Awards, are actually not allowing photographs in the contest that have playback. Okay, so you're not even really getting rewarded for it, figuratively and literally. So it's something to kind of take into account. If you're doing guiding and stuff, that's different, right? Because people are paying to see stuff, but it's just something to be in mind. Also be wary around nests, okay? If the bird starts to not approach the nest, or it's freaking out and it won't approach the nest at all, that's where you need to take a step back, okay? Because the bird could abandon the nest. So that's another thing to kind of think about. And then the very last thing, not every photo has to be award winning, okay? That's the thing, especially when we travel to see rare birds, right? often is the case the first time the bird is spotted, that's where we get the best shots because the bird has not been exposed to the crowds and you can get the best shot. And we are so compelled to get that photo when we've traveled and paid our way there. It's okay. It's okay if it doesn't work out. All right. You don't want to reach and you don't want to harm the bird. Okay. You don't want to reach. Okay. And I have to end on a bang. Don't be a Christina Ricci. Okay. Do not reach for the bird and freak the bird out, and keep those things in mind when you are photographing. I can't tell you that enough. Can't tell you how many times I've seen it, and it's frustrating, right? So let's all try to keep the birds in mind. And with that, I just want to say thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity. And again, if you want to email me about anything, I have prints on my Instagram account right there, and I will open up the next 5 minutes or so for questions.
Mitch, this is Joan. I have a question.
Yes.
Does it make a big difference about the color of clothing you have on? Like camouflage versus a white shirt or pink shirts or, something that's not neutral?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's kind of a part of the sort of actually I'll keep my last page up for everybody. Yeah, like I mean, I have never really gone out in camo, so I can't really attest to like what it was like before and after I did that. But I'm generally going out in earth tones anyway. Like I'm not really going out like hunter orange. So it's probably best to not be super bright that way. But if you kind of if you're wearing kind of subtle earth tones kind of thing, and you're relatively calm. Another thing that happens all the time is people see the bird and they raise their camera up really fast. And there's like, oh my God. And then the bird sees that and it freaks out. So if you just kind of stay subtle with your movements, and yeah, I think it's better I think wearing not loud clothing is probably going to help you out. But I've never really done the full camo thing. But I'm sure it probably works a lot better. Good question.
Okay, thank you. Because you see all the big lenses with the camel covers on, and
Yes.
and then the person's there in a white shirt, or it's kind of contradictory too.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it can only help to have in camo, I imagine. I'm not a big blind photographer. I've also noticed someone in the chat said you can take burst shots. So that is one thing that I also forgot to mention. If you go into in the back of your menu, let me get that image up again. So this part right here with the H, right? So that's where you press and hold the shutter and it will take a bunch of photos at once. So your iPhone takes burst photos, and I always have it on there because I mean, we have the ability to store so many images these days, and I generally shoot in medium raw to kind of reduce the file size a little bit. But yeah, rapid fire photos is definitely the way to go. Typical telephoto lens size and speed. Okay, great question. So I have the 100 to 400 millimeter lens. I love this lens because of its versatility. All right, I can shoot like this, or if the bird is farther away, I can zoom out. And the beauty of the part 2, because they've now made a second version, is that it has a twist zoom. Oh my God, this is such a life changer. Before it had the trombone style where I had to crank, lock, turn, and by that point the bird's gone. So this new twist is just so smooth and wonderful. I swear I don't work for Canon. I don't mean to talk like that, but yes, I think it's great. And this is where you can get this is a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, the second version. Yes, exactly, the Canon version. I've actually done some side-by-side comparisons with my old. It brings in a lot more light. The image stabilizer, which is something I actually didn't talk about, is much better. So there's image stabilizers that is just below your autofocus and manual focus tab on the lens. I usually have the image stabilizer on, unless the camera's off or something. It just reduces hand movement. But I also have a Canon 7D Mark II. Okay, so that is a crop sensor camera. Okay, what that's going to do is it's going to minimize the amount of pixels that's generated, but it's going to crop the image. So a 100/400 on my 7D Mark II is now about 200 to 670, something like that. So I get an extra boost from that, which is great for bird photography. The only downside is that a full frame camera like the 5D or something is going to produce higher quality images a little bit. So if you're more into like landscape and birds in the environment, I would probably go with a full frame. But if you're really just about the bird and that's about it, like the 7D does a really good job. So for me, the 7D with the 100 to 400, I've gotten used to getting close to birds. But if you have the means to get a 600 millimeter lens, go for it. The only issue with that is that you're pretty much fixed on that size. If you get 600 millimeters, that's what you're getting, right? You can't really do anything else. Whereas with this guy, I can step away, I can get closer. There's a little more versatility. It's a little bit better for my type of photography. Excellent. Are there any other questions anyone else has for me?
I think Daryl had a question, didn't he?
So,
Oh, no.
do birds see colors? Definitely. I like hummingbirds and stuff are definitely attracted to to reds and pinks and stuff like that. So I've definitely seen. I've gone birding with people who are wearing loud reds and oranges and seen hummingbirds like fluttering around them. So yeah, they definitely do. They definitely can see stuff. I'm not really sure. I'm sure Scott could probably chime in, give a little better advice there about what other birds kind of see. It's a little bit different, obviously, from our eyesight. But yeah, sometimes, especially with the hummingbirds, they can see certain colors, certain wavelengths better than others. But yeah, so that may be one thing to think about. If you're going to go to a hummingbird feeder place, maybe not wear a bright red, something like that. But yeah, I've never had a weird issue with that. Anything else? I love these questions, by the way. This is great. I hope everyone's enjoyed the talk as well. My first time ever doing this, so this is very exciting for me. Of course, no, it's my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Mitch. I don't think there are any more questions, so I'll see you tomorrow. I'll ask you questions. But which photo, by the way, won that award that you
So it wasn't I didn't get like first prize or anything crazy like that. It's this one though. This was the one that was a highly recommended in the best portrait category, which was, I got a free book out of it, and my parents have it in their house. So that was a plus. And so yeah, I'm always submitting stuff to contests because you just never know. Contests they're never biased. They always just take what's best. So I always do that and see what happens. All right, yeah, thank you guys. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. All right, guys, thank you so much. And yeah, feel free to email me. Again, if you have any questions about what to buy or, anything else, again, my email stuff is right. I can send it up again, but yeah. I think that's pretty much it on my end. I don't know if the Marion County people want to, close us out here or just end the Zoom. I'm not sure. Oops.
Mitch, thank you very much. I'm going to close the recording now.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And you guys have a good rest of your day. Okay.